That going.
Hog.
Okay. And so, all right, we are recording now. So thank you guys for showing up. And I'm not sure if I conveyed this to everyone just yet, but today's the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and so we're going to have a roundtable discussion, kind of reflecting on it, on the kinds of ways it altered our maybe lives or perspectives, and maybe what we've learned from it. And I think there's really no specific way it has to be approached, whether we have stories to share or not, or just personal observations. But it was kind of a defining moment, and most of us here in the IDW community were kids at the time. So I think having grown up in a post 9/11 world, but kind of remembering a little bit what things were like before that, we can have some interesting input. So I guess to set the tone, I can just sort of talk about my own perspective on it. So it was 2001. So I was 9 years old at the time. I'm currently 29 then. I'll be turning 30 pretty soon. And I was in the fourth grade, and it was an interesting thing for me because I remember a lot of folks have since told me that like what they had going on that day, like their school or their class shut down and it was televised. But at my school, it was not even remarked that this had happened. Everything went normal that day at school. The way I found it out is my father used to pick me up from school rather than take the bus home because didn't like the bus, and he had a shift where he'd work like from 6 to 2, and so we'd get out at school at 3, so he had time to get back from work and stop by to pick me and my sister up. So I was going out to the place where they would release the students, and there was my father standing where he'd usually wait for us. And the first thing he said to me was, today was a bad day. And I asked him why. Then he started telling me about what happened. So I had no idea what the Twin Towers were. I didn't know what the Pentagon was. I didn't know these things. And I didn't really know what to think of it. But my usual schedule is I would just like watch my evening cartoons. You guys might remember that. That was back when you
Evening, you
actually
mean
watched.
morning, right?
No, in the evening. In the evening.
But it happened in the morning.
It did, but I didn't find out until I got let out at school, is what I'm saying. So, yeah. So, my father telling me about it is how I found out. For some reason, my school did not grind to a halt over this. I don't know why. I don't know whose decision that was. But, so I'm finding out about it at 3 p.m. And then when I go home, I do my homework and then I want to watch my evening cartoons and stuff. And that's back when things would come on. When they were scheduled to come on. There was no live streaming things, right? It was old-fashioned TV. And my father instead didn't let me. He made me come out and watch all the news about it. I was very annoyed about it because I didn't see what the big deal was. But he was telling me like, Joe, this is history. Like this is going to be very important. And so, I spent the whole evening doing that, and I was just not happy with it at all. Not seeing the point. Like why waste my time like this is basically what my 9-year-old head is thinking. I want to do something fun. Why do I have to watch the news? But it was very clear by the next day just how big this was. And what's very interesting there is I'm basically a kid who's grown up in the 90s, right? So I was born in 91. It's the golden age of like TV and movies and video games that really emerged, all this like pleasant stuff. The Soviet Union collapsed 2 months after I was born. I didn't know what a Cold War was. We don't yet have a major threat or rival, right? So obviously, this is the day in which radical Islam kind of emerges as that. China's still steadily rising, but they're not like the kind of global menace they are now. Russia still consolidating under Yeltsin in the aftermath of this. So America had like a full decade where everything just seemed so pleasant and optimistic. Everything's cheery, and that's what I remember about that sort of that '90s period and the slight overlap into 2001. Um, so that's my mindset. Like, why can't I watch my cartoons? And then what we have in a single day is like an immediate shift to a completely different way of viewing reality that is felt by everyone at the same time. And from that point forward, I've really noticed that there has always kind of been something in the air about the way people think and act and feel about things that's just substantially more negative. That kind of like it was almost like people were just sort of, you know, floating around. Things seemed so much less difficult before 9/11. And there's just been this sense of fear and distrust and nervousness that folks had ever since 9/11 happened. That I've noticed still it hasn't gone. And a lot of things that occur today, I think, can be explained by that. But that's one thing that I've noticed. But one thing I didn't realize though is, well, there were some immediate things that happened, like we began the war in Afghanistan um, as a result of this. There's a lot of just long-term kind of domino or snowball effects that have happened as well. And one can even be kind of found in my own personal life. And so um, a couple years before, when I was in the second grade, um, our teacher would sometimes, when like they basically wanted us to do recess, but we couldn't go outside for some reason because it was like raining or something. We kind of just had free time in the classroom and it was like, go find any book you want and like read it or do whatever. And so a lot of kids went for storybooks and stuff, but I stumbled across this astronomy book um, and picked it up and looked at it. And it talked a lot about, basic astronomy, which I thought was fascinating. And I learned a lot of things that wouldn't actually be taught in the normal like science class until like middle school or high school time, which was interesting. And so they started talking about like Big Bang Theory. Like that's how I learned the Big Bang Theory, was as a second grader, just looking through this non-standard book that was on a shelf in the classroom. It wasn't part of our science lesson. I learned about like nebulas and black holes and stuff reading this. Like absolutely fascinating. And I decided, and then I'm like, you know what? I want to be an astrophysicist. I didn't know the word astrophysicist, but that's what I wanted to be. Um, and so I wanted to be that way even after 9/11 for a while. Um, but there were things set in motion, by the attack that I wasn't aware of at the time. And wouldn't be until 2005 that I changed my mind about my career. And so what I had always been excited about was the math and science classes, because I had in my head I'm going to be an astrophysicist. But then by 2005 we're in the war in Iraq, right? The war on terror had shifted to that, and the controversies have emerged by around that time. I ended up watching that Fahrenheit 9/11 documentary about it, and that left the very unpleasant feeling in me, seeing what had happened with that war. And I made a decision at that moment. I said, you know, because at this point you've learned a lot of basic American history, about like the Revolution and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So I've gotten that much, of my history. I have this idea of American democracy, and seeing that documentary, realized just how easily it can be abused and taken advantage of, and be led astray if we elect the bad people or the wrong people. And so I decided that I was instead going to pursue a career in politics. And then from that point forward, I was less excited about getting into the best math or science classes, but getting into the best and most interesting social studies classes. And I was in the eighth grade when I saw that. It was actually after the 2004 election. It was, I think Michael Moore made it to try and sway 2004 voters. I saw it a year later, but it had that impact on me. And so like the war in Iraq is a direct result of 9/11, and so this career change on my part, this deviating from what my own natural interest was, you could say, it was a prolonged effect of the attack. And from there, when I started high school, I joined the Teen Democrats. I began canvassing for the Democratic Party. So I was like almost every weekend in 2006, I was knocking doors and handing out candidate information to the locals in my area. So I got to see the Democrats win the midterm election, take back the House. See Nancy Pelosi become the first female speaker and all that. Became the president of Teen Democrats. Worked with helping the party to see Obama get elected and see him actually win North Carolina. And from there, I had continued involvement in the party. I've been an officer in the party in multiple capacities since. I've run for office twice myself. I've worked on a couple campaigns. Now, during that time, of course, as I get older, and I think distance grows between now and, well, the present moment, we'll see, whatever the given present moment was, in this timeline of events, between that and the Iraq War, you start seeing a lot of the faults and failures in the Democratic Party as well. At least I did. And so then I became very dissatisfied for it. And then that was sort of a big part of what led me to the IDWs, because it got to a point where I wanted to have honest criticism of my own political party for its corruption or its lies. And it became increasingly difficult to do that without being accused of some sort of Republican in disguise and the usual mudslinging tactics that are used. And so that was a big thing that brought me to the IDW, was doing that. So, and I think when you look at it that way, it's kind of hard to imagine something like the IDW even existing without 9/11. It seems like it's, when you look at the sort of the sequence of events and how it impacted politics and the culture wars, something like the IDW seems to be one of those results as well. I don't know how many people changed their careers, or went on different livelihoods. Like, I feel like a lot of people would have, if they're going to go to business school before 9/11, if they were that type, they still did anyway. Maybe a lot of people, if they were going to be doctors before 9/11, if they were on that path, they still grew up to become doctors. But it had a very pronounced impact on my life. And there's so many things that I've done. Like, I'm 29, so I'm still considered one of the young people, at least for a little while.
You would have
There's
been
so
one of the
many.
older hijackers,
Yeah.
ironically.
I'm still I've done so many things within my short life so far that I don't know a lot of people would have done by the age of 29. And now looking back, and I just sort of see, a lot of this happened specifically because Osama bin Laden and 19 of his operatives decided to hijack 4 planes and crash them into 3 buildings and in a empty field over in Pennsylvania. So that's sort of my reflection on all of it.
I
Well,
have
the
nothing
studio
really.
has some production notes for you. I'm kidding, but I do have some notes that I took while you were talking. I think that's interesting that you, and I don't mean this sarcastically or as an insult, but that you effectively gave your life story when introducing a lecture topic for the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And again, I don't mean that as an insult. I think that's interesting that you have a very personal sort of arc that you can track with this.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. And I suspect I'm not the only one. Maybe not everyone to the severe extent as mine, but I figure most people have at least something.
Yeah. So here's the notes on what you were saying, just because there's certain points that I thought were more
Use.
good Zoom tight. I mean, assalamu alaikum, brother. When you said Cold War, that made me think of COVID memes. I don't know why I put that in the notes, but a Cold War, right? I don't know, dumb pun. You mentioned 90s prosperity, and I think that there's an important note to make here, which is there's a book, and I think a movie or a documentary that came out based on the book called Commanding Heights. which is about the economic and financial uh, superiority of America in the 90s and how broadly the financial sector was expanding and really our global influence, our global economic influence that happened throughout the 90s, cementing America as the most powerful nation to ever exist in all of human history. And when you're talking about 90s prosperity, it was definitely prosperous for North Americans.
Hmm.
Uh, but this is not the case for many other places in the world, as we know. The fact that the Soviet Union had just been dissolved is, you know, I guess, description enough for how bad a lot of other countries were about to have it. And so this prosperity is very specific to being an NA server player. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
The other servers, their, their internal economy is not. So, being born in America was really the meta for the 90s. It's also probably important to note that in 90s America, this was the height of racial harmony. So you made a couple mentions throughout what you were saying about, or at least one about how the way that people describe things now is notably or markedly more negative than how they used to describe things. And
Hmm.
this obviously has had direct translation into racial politics or identity politics and race relations in America. 90s the 90s were probably the greatest integration of races that we've had, at least culturally speaking, that we've had in American history. And so it's it's interesting that this outside uh, racially minority force has sort of catalyzed a division between the races that would have otherwise been probably successful in their unity. So we could probably say more about that, but I just thought that was interesting when you brought it up. Uh, I have a couple more notes. Sorry. Uh, when I was in university, or maybe community college, I forget how long ago it was, but I had a class, ethics class. It might have been like comparative politics or something, and there was a lecture day where the professor had thrown some questions to the class. I believe 9/11, uh, that one of the anniversaries passed around that day or that week, and the professor had asked some of the students like, just what do you think about certain stuff? And me and a couple of friends noticed. I mean, there's a lot to say about how academia is run, and then especially the quality of the students that are in it. I mean, most of them only know English. It's their first only and native language. And if you read the papers that they write, it's pathetic that they can't write papers. Like they can barely speak English. They're still practicing talking, basically. And it's incredible how poor the education is. But further than just being bad at speaking and writing English, they tend to be incredibly bad at articulating things and woefully ignorant of like the political system and what's happening, just news around the world and stuff like that. And this was there were a lot of people fighting in the class because people just didn't know things that were happening, and some of them did, and there's some fighting. So me and one of my friends interrupted, uh, and we said, "How many people in here, just by a show of hands, how many of you think you know how many wars America is in right now?" And as a demonstration of this exact problem that I'm describing, I would like to throw this question to you guys. Joe, you probably know since you're more intimately related to politics, but for the rest of you, how many of you are aware of how many wars America is involved in right now? And I don't mean Congress declared wars. The definition, then the only country that could ever go to war would be America, since America is the only one with our Congress. When I say war, I mean an armed conflict between two nation states, right, where there's only two flags involved, in which over 100 people have died. That's the sort of international standard definition of what a war is. How many of you think you know how many wars we're in right now?
It's hard to say now because they all seem to blur together after a while.
Well, so I'll take it from that response and from the lack of any others that uh, people are simply not aware. And this was sort of the point that um, I believe we were trying to make during that class. It's not two, it's not three, it's not just the Middle East. It was 6 before leaving Afghanistan, and 7 if you count the Ugandan conflicts that ended a few months prior to me asking that question in that class a few years ago. So 7, basically, at that time. We were in 7 wars. Right now, we're in 5. Um, Pakistan counts as one of them, by the way. That's interesting, isn't it? And Uganda, of all places, we were at war with them. If depending on how you define it, but the definition I gave counts us as being at war with Uganda until a few years ago. Um, America is in a lot of places. If you don't count uh, armed conflicts, or excuse me, if you also count armed conflicts in which there are not two majority flags involved, meaning that the conflict isn't between nation states, then America is in way more wars because we have a heavy presence in Africa, in which I think on any given day we have over 100 operations happening, military operations in Africa. So it's the pain of the world and hurt goes deep, but it's crazy to me that we're so heavily invested in this sort of global project regarding armed conflict, and people focus on this one.
Hmm.
So I just think that's fascinating. That was one of my notes, and I still have a few more. Sorry.
Well, I think it's very analogous to like people have compared America to Rome, for a lot of reasons, but that actually might be one of the more salient ones in which, Rome was kind of, you hear about the Pax Romana, but the Pax Romana is mostly referring to the internal Roman world. But they were always at a state of war of some kind on their frontiers. And it would fluctuate like where the majority of the conflict was. Many of them would be simultaneous. They'd be with small powers, not even non-state forces, but sometimes they'd be up against other major empires, like the Parthians, for example. Um, and it could very well be though that like it all just seems so muddled together, and so I also suspect just the attention span of a Roman at the time, it would have been hard for them to answer like, well, how many wars are we fighting in this empire right now? Like how many wars were we engaged in? And it's like when your reach is so great and in so many directions, and you have you know uh, a head that's designed with both eyes on the front, and you can look in one direction. It can be kind of hard to keep track of it all, especially when much of it's obviously
Right.
like it's intentionally meant to be unclear and muddied. Like, I mean, I'm aware that we have wars going on in Latin America too with the drug cartels, for example. To what extent are they separate things or all one thing? How do you
Correct, Mundo.
compartmentalize them? That's hard to say, right? And like we've been at war with the cartels in Mexico to an extent, and it could always increase or decrease. People don't talk a lot about it yet. There's fighting that happens.
So I think that, like, sure, we could say definitions get blurry, but there's a spectrum has two ends, right? The ends of a spectrum are not blurry. And on one end of the spectrum with a clear and distinct definition, like the one I gave earlier, it's hard to say that this isn't clearly what's happening, where we have 5 distinct wars with nation states going on. On the other end of the spectrum, with a broader and looser definition, where we have all of these other armed conflicts, or even if we aren't putting boots on the ground, like you mentioned, the cartel, we aren't at war with cartel in a formal sense, but we are heavily invested in in one side winning that conflict. Uh, and similarly in Colombia, the CIA and the DEA were heavily, heavily invested in manipulating that situation. So that's and that's still ongoing as far as I know. So yeah, there is we can include a lot more, but at the bare minimum, it's at least 5. And I think that that's pretty nutty because no other country has that many, with the exception of maybe China right now. But you need to use the fast and loose definition in order to get China's number that high, right? And that high number is only 5. So it's pretty crazy how strongly America's in this. I guess as a side topic, it'd be fair to note that America is probably, or at least in my estimation, America is the only country in history that is a warrior country without warrior culture. What I mean by that is that everybody, not everybody, but you'll often hear, the term military-industrial complex, and that's true. It is a huge component to our economy and our way of life, but it in no way seems to directly affect our culture. Our culture is completely divorced from that. And you mentioned Rome. They had a warrior country or a warrior government as well, but their citizens were all like deeply educated in what was going on regarding combat, and they had a culture of power. They had a culture that promoted and celebrated power, and basic America. And so it's very strange that we are the most deeply violent country ever, but we don't have a violent culture. So there is either an intentional disconnect happening there, or uh, some sort of segmentation that appears given how our politics work. I don't really know the cause and effect there, but it is interesting to look at it that way. Um, my last couple of notes from what you said. I wanted to bring up something that Bin Laden said. Bin Laden was interviewed. I forget if this was before or after 9/11. It was probably before, but um, an interviewer, I believe, from the BBC or Al Jazeera, some shit like that. Somebody was asking him how he justifies his use of terrorism, to control or fight a people. It must have been after 9/11 because they were specifically asking in regards to how he treated America. And Osama bin Laden said, he asked the interviewer rhetorically, America is a democracy, right? And the interviewer said yes. And Osama said, and a democracy is ran by its people, right? And the interviewer said yes. And bin Laden then said, then the citizens are enemy combatants. Now, I laughed really hard when I first heard that, and I don't hear anybody laughing, which means that you might be getting the wrong takeaway from this. But I promise you, if you think about it hard enough, that's deeply, deeply humorous. Um, so, anyways, I have a couple other notes.
I mean, he's not wrong. That's basically how we've pretty much treated it for past century. Civilians are legitimate military targets and have been since the First World War.
Well, we, as in America, have not done that. I'm not
No,
really sure.
I mean, we deleted Dresden.
The firebombing of Dresden was carried out by the British paratroopers, so, relax.
Well, not paratroopers, and it was a combined Allied effort.
No, excuse me.
I
Yeah.
mean, we did say not to. We should focus on rail lines, but we did allow it.
I believe
And then we did it to
Dresden was.
Tokyo.
We tried to evacuate Dresden beforehand.
And then good old Bomber Harris deleted Tokyo.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, and that he specifically ordered that the B-17s, because at that point we'd started bombing the mainland, mostly targeting like industrial centers and whatnot. But he launched a deliberate campaign where he ordered the B-17s. He basically doubled up on the normal bombing. He ordered that they carry twice as many their normal bomb load of just incendiaries, and then they proceeded to firebomb Tokyo so hard that the death toll was in, I think, the hundreds of thousands. Like, it was drastically worse than the atomic bombings were.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, like our history has like a lot of like drastic war crimes. Just people
I don't know.
typically
That
tend to forget
seems like
about that.
a rogue officer who wasn't operating under American or theoretical
Rogue
jurisdiction.
officer. He's a highly decorated. He served in the government too later on.
I
Like,
don't know.
this
I've
is
never heard of him.
Bomber Harris.
Somebody get this man out of here. We have a crazy person in the lobby.
Yeah, let's see.
So, anyways, regardless of the state of that of what America's done, I mean, compare that to what Bin Laden said. That quote I was talking about.
Oh, Curtis LeMay, that's his name. I always forget these two guys, or I always switch them around.
Right. So in the governments that we attacked, which were non-democratic, the civilians would not be enemy combatants. There's no way to even distinction without just coming up with a completely new relation to the prior. So there's no way that we could justify that in a broader sense other than like their like cost benefit analysis sacrifice in order to win the war faster or whatever calculus they did for that. There's no way to justify it in like an ethical position um, beyond that. So comparing that to what Bin Laden said, where he's attacking a democracy of which the civilians can be considered directly enemy combatants because they are indistinct from the government in which you're attacking, it seems like you could work a way for greatly justified. And I'm not an apologist for Bin Laden, but I'm just saying that if you want to really, deep dive into it, that's something that should be considered. There was something else that Joe said about it is to abuse our system politically. And if you watch people like JREG or these other people on YouTube that are radicalists or just have alternative ideologies, one of the things that you'll see them talk about quite often and sort of repeat as a catchphrase is that liberal democracy has failed. Um, Joe's note on how easy it was to abuse this system is precisely why it is a weak system. And yeah,
My mistake. I unmuted on the community account that I'm also using to stream this. I think that's an important observation. I'm actually somewhat glad you picked up on that part of what I said. I mean, in some ways, I'm actually appreciative. It shows you were listening very carefully to what I was saying, and I wasn't necessarily
yeah, I literally
expecting.
took notes.
Yeah. But so I'll let you know another thing. So with the experiences I've had, I mean, you won't meet very many people of any age, but certainly not millennials who kind of lived the life I lived starting when they were 14, and have this kind of reflection on it. It's sort of like, uh, part of like the hero's journey, as it's often represented, is somebody young goes on an adventure and then he comes back with some kind of wisdom. And he might have a wisdom beyond his years for having gone on the adventure. And he's almost like an old man among his peers when he comes back to his home sometimes. And that can be a blessing or a burden depending on the arc of the story. And so, I kind of, sometimes it's a hard time just sort of relating my own personal life and experiences to folks because so few people made the life decisions that I did and went through what I did. But I'm trying to like extract some actual wisdom out of it. And I've been working on a book basically, trying to get something material out of it. I'd say I'm about halfway done with it. And it's basically going to be a guide for people to get involved in politics and to kind of give an idea of sort of a framework for how people should go about it. But one of the things I start out with was basically like the first chapter is kind of just explaining the idea of the book, but the second thing is like, the first step of the actual advice. And I start out, with the assumption that like you are a crook. We have a system that is run by crooks, and everything you hate about it is because of the crookedness. And you have to get that out of you, or else nothing will improve. And so I kind of start talking about ways that can be mitigated and avoided and purged of you. But the essential takeaway I've had is that it's the same takeaway that Bin Laden has. It's the same logic. We live in a democracy. There's ways in which it is subverted, or there's ways in which the system is treated. But at the end of it all, every election has been decided based on who got the most votes, and thus who actually bothered to show up to vote, and who actually, knew what they were voting for, or bothered to, have the right priorities when they went to the ballot box. And to the extent that our citizens at large have been bad at doing this, that they have been negligent, that they have taken the power of their vote for granted, power, as Bin Laden and you, No Name, have aptly observed, power that extends across the world. An Indian voter, we're talking a country with a population about 4 times that of the United States. Their vote, the power of their vote does not project across the globe like this, but ours does, and we have used it so poorly. And so much of what has happened, whether before or after 9/11, however you want to tally it, so much of what has gone wrong is you can talk a lot about a lot of problems or put a lot of faults on a handful of people, whether it's terrorists like Al Qaeda or whether it's the elite, the 1% or whatever. But at the end of the day, often these sorts of observations are an abdication of the individual responsibility that the average American has in all of this, and the lack of self-awareness. And so what I think is an important step, I think it's a good that you noted this, No Name, is that we actually all have some sort of role in which we're a part of this, and we haven't recognized it. Maybe some of us have been in denial about the extent to which we as citizens are the authors of our own suffering and ills. And so my hope is that one day people will eventually become wiser for it. But I suspect that they may not. In fact, I would say it's more likely that the American democratic project will, in some capacity, fail. I guess it depends on what you define as a failure state, but it's not going to be that kind of optimistic, like we're supercharged freedom and equality. Let's go full throttle into the future that we had that sense in the 90s. It might be something worse. But I will say that if it does fail, it won't be because we were wronged per se as citizens, but rather because we misused our own system and we got the failure that we deserve from misuse.
I am far more optimistic than you, which is to say that you already have a fairly optimistic view, given a lot of the people in these types of communities that are otherwise have very negative views of the American government. But so more so than your optimism is mine, where I am actually personally fine with a world government so long as it's America's. I really think that we have the greatest government that's ever existed, which is not to say that ours was built extraordinarily perfectly, but rather that every other government is ran just so fantastically poorly that there is no comparison to our own. So I personally don't think that we're going to have to deal with any sort of massive or wide scale failure. I don't think that this project ends anytime soon. But I could be wrong. I have one final note that I wrote down or typed down from what you originally said. You said something to the effect that the IDW couldn't have existed without 9/11. This seems like a very strange claim to me. As far as my understanding goes, the IDW is about academic abuse in the most general sense. So if there's really a connection between that and 9/11, I want to know what you meant by that. The takeaway that I thought was going to happen about a 9/11 talk with the IDW would have been about, or I assumed would have been about the expansion of the surveillance state as an effect of the very vulnerable position a lot of Americans found themselves in after 9/11.
Well, I think if anyone wants to make that observation or had something to bring to the table to discuss on that, that also would have been useful. I mean, for some people, that might be what their experience, post 9/11 has been. Just to sort of answer your question, though, or your observation, I see there's basically, like I said before, that decidedly negative tone that politics, culture, media, pretty much everything took after 9/11 happened, and that it is that negativity which has spiraled, creating increased conflict, which I think seeped into academia, led to the creation of the IDW. It just charged so many things to be combative, that the events of 9/11, that I think it set something like the IDW in motion. There's another way you could look at it, which is that the IDW is also kind of a follow-up to New Atheism, which itself was a direct product of 9/11. I mean, like the main figures, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, they were very much motivated by what happened with 9/11 and how they thought, religious tradition and belief had a certain danger to them that made itself apparent with modern technology. And so they began talking about it. I mean, Sam Harris came out and said on his
He's
podcast last
distinctly
night.
anti-Muslim, yeah.
Yeah, and he came out on his podcast talking about how this also set him down that course, right? He became famous on this, and then he was in New Atheism, and now he's in the IDW, and a lot of people who were paying attention to that movement are part of the IDW. Like I had a New Atheism phase. Other folks did as well, and like it was like 10 years ago, but it's sort of like there's kind of a collective memory of these things going on as well. And so those are the kind of things I was getting at. But to the extent that like the IDW is also a very anti-establishment thing, and people who are unhappy with the surveillance state, that's also a consequence of 9/11 with the Patriot Act and all that. So you're not wrong there either.
Yeah, I did not expect an actual connection to be drawn, but you made it very clear. I didn't realize that the New Atheist people carried over.
Yeah, it's something I've observed a lot. It's not just the fact that Sam Harris is there, but like so many people that I've talked to were a part of both. I think maybe the people who weren't were more the Gen Z side of IDW followers, people in their early 20s who wouldn't have been paying attention to New Atheism. So it's slightly a generational difference there, but the millennials of the IDW were also a big part of New Atheism.
I guess as a follow-up question, do you think we should be concerned with the enormous cringe factor from the New Atheism and Atheism Plus communities that existed seeping into the IDW community?
I mean, that's kind of already been a thing, and I should know. I was one of those cringe atheists. Yeah. Now I'm just an atheist without the cringe, and I see a lot of the cringe stuff in the IDW too. I mean, just there's some people who are here to be nasty and are not very insightful, and they're at a point where they know they're angry at something, but they're very bad at articulating it or responding to it well. And that was a big part of New Atheism too.
Max, are you on here causing a ruckus? Max.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we've talked a lot about like sort of my whole perspective. Like it's almost been a whole hour. I did want to see other folks share their observations as well. I mean, I appreciate the back and forth we had, No Name, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion on like purely, my 9/11 focused ideas.
I missed the entire thing because I was picking up my dog.
Well, I recorded it.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll just repeat the only important thing that you missed out on so that we can catch you up.
Snacks, I come in here to not listen to you.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, who's a no name?
Docs.
Um,
Docs.
My favorite part of this, to which I got zero response whatsoever, and that's partly why I appreciated it so much, was Bin Laden was interviewed post 9/11 by a reporter from or some bullshit, I don't remember. And they asked him how he justified his use of terrorism in controlling or fighting America. And he rhetorically asked the interviewer, is America a democracy? The interviewer says yes. And then he asked, and a democracy is ran by its citizens, right? The interviewer says yes. Then bin Laden said, well, then its citizens are enemy combatants. So ultimately, where we're going with this is hashtag bin Laden did nothing wrong. And this is the official stance that I'm going to take right now. If anyone disagrees, I am ready and very willing to fight you.
Jesus Christ.
No need to bring religion into this.
Joe, if you're talking,
I did
you're
it.
muted.
Yeah, I did it again. I muted the wrong thing. I'm getting used to two things at once. But yeah, we already brought religion into it. That's why there was 9/11. But yeah, Troopy, I was interested. It's interesting. You only joined just now. I was interested in like what your reflection on 9/11 was.
Then I didn't show up.
Well, I mean, you didn't show up until
You don't
now.
remember?
Yeah, you haven't been here until now. But I was interested in like what you've reflected on it. Because I kind of went to a thing about like my story with it happening. I was thinking other people could share those as well, and maybe how it's informed their opinion of things. You don't have to.
You mean like on the day that it happened, or like how it's affected my life since?
I mean, it could be both.
Yes.
I went into to length about both.
Because I hardly remember it happening. I remember being in third grade class and then just getting sent home in the middle of the day. And I didn't watch it on TV or anything like that. I just remember getting sent home, and then I like went about my day, and nobody told me about it. And then all of a sudden, like the following years, every single year on 9/11, the school would like make a big deal about it and then like show videos of it happening and stuff. So it was weird because like I feel like everybody has that story of like, oh, I came down and like my parents were watching it and I saw it all happen on TV and nobody was explaining things to me. I was completely ignorant to it happening. So it's kind of like a weird thing that I've been like I know was like a huge thing that impacted our country, but I seem to have always been kind of disconnected from it just because it's not something that stands out in my memory. I remember getting sent home that day and hearing that something bad happened, but that's about all I knew.
Speaking of stands out, I remember seeing it live on TV. I saw the second plane hit in real time. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, fuck those capitalist pigs. Glory to Allah.
What were you
And
in kindergarten? Shut the fuck up.
I was in third grade too. We are exactly the same age, is what I just found out from your story.
I thought you were like 20.
No, look. What my friends used to say is I act like I'm 5, sound like I'm 10, and look like I'm 15. but I am very much not 20. I'm an old man now.
So did I show up at the end of everything? Why is everybody muted?
Well, at least in my case, it's because I have background noise that will leak through, so I mute.
He's intimidated.
Gotcha.
He doesn't know how to respond to my righteous Islamic apologetic rhetoric.
I don't think anybody knows how to respond to you half the time.
Not today.
I noticed Loak is here. Did he just join today?
I've been in this forever.
Yeah,
He
is
always
that Exile?
No.
No. Did he change his name again?
No, Loak is from No Name server.
Oh, okay.
I'm from everywhere, man. I'm on all the big ones. They're all the same.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank y'all.
Cyborg's here. Cyborg, what do you have to say about 9/11?
Not a lot, really, man.
I saw a YouTube comment saying that what was it? It was about that that commercial for that mattress store. They're like, we're doing our 9/11 sale. You know,
Oh,
just like the Twin Towers, we're bringing our prices down.
cringe.
And the YouTube comment said, I give that commercial a 9 out of 11.
That's really funny. The only thing I dislike about that is that the capitalist pigs have found a way to commercialize the terrorist acts that we've portrayed.
Well, I remember like a year after it happened, they had like I saw that commercial for like those people who sell like collector coins that like buy the 9/11 commemorative coin, and it has the Twin Towers on it, and you could make it even so that the towers would stand up out of the coin. And I just sort of thought, why would someone want to buy that? But then it's like,
I have 3 of them.
You have those? You actually have those? Why do you have those?
9/11 was a big moment. Those coins were being advertised, and they're silver, so their value was only going to go up.
Okay, I was going to ask, are they at least made of like a valuable metal, not just metal plated or something?
Yeah, no, they are 99.99% silver.
Well, there you go.
I remember I used to see those coins, and like they had like the little part where like the tower would stand up.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like
I used to see it, like all the time, but I never got any.
It was so for some reason that wasn't controversial, which seemed to me just the same capitalizing on a tragedy.
But it was patriotic, right? Capitalism is patriotic, and so when you do something patriotic after 9/11, it was always good. Whether
Then
you were standing at the
mattress store
national.
lady lose her business then?
Well, I don't know what they were doing at the mattress store, but
I mean, the mattress store. I mean, I'm pretty sure the reason why she lost her business is because her advertisement was completely and utterly distasteful, as funny as it is, like now.
Yeah.
But like if it was made like, I'm not gonna say today, but like in the current year, people would probably not care.
It was made, I think, like 5 or 6 years ago. It was pretty well after 9/11, but they did it like on the like around 9/11, you know, and people still found it distasteful. But you know, that's interesting because it's like even pretty well after the event, it kind of shows how sensitive people are about 9/11.
Oh yeah, I mean,
we should have a.
You can go onto Twitter.com and you can see like some absolutely like egregious takes, and then people are just dogpiling them. But I mean, I like it because the dog shit takes that some people have like absolutely deserve to get mocked.
We should have little weekend sale holidays, like for mattress stores or whatever, blowout sales. For like the anniversary of like the Turkish massacre and like stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Because we could totally get away with that in this country. but technically even less tasteful than 9/11 sales.
Okay.
A Holocaust discount.
Right. Well, but the Armenian genocide? See what I'm saying? We got some wiggle room for opportunities here.
Maybe the Young Turks will do a marketing campaign based on that.
Yeah, imagine having a last name that ends in YAN and being a newscaster on the Young Turks. Anyways, you mentioned controversial earlier. Here's a controversial topic. I think 9/11 was an inside job during a jobless economy. It's basically the perfect crime. But there's a lot of detractors to this. They'll say, no, it was clearly an outside job. You can see the sky in all of the videos.
Oh, man.
What do you guys think?
Well, that's one thing that's interesting too, is the 9/11 conspiracy side of this, and like it kind of like I feel like there's been like obviously there's always been conspiracy theorists, but 9/11 really seemed to create a conspiracy culture as a result of things as well.
I'd say
I don't think it created it, but it
I'd
definitely
say
collected them.
the assassination of JFK created the culture.
Yeah, that's probably.
and then 9/11 just like spun it up.
Well, yeah, I
Again.
guess JFK's
I think it
assassination
collected them
created the
together.
culture. But like 9/11 made it so that like the average person in the population is now like believing a lot of conspiracy theories, however much or little due diligence they've done. And I don't think that was as much of a feature before 9/11.
I mean, I think like there's a good proportion of the population that is and is still hoping for it to come out that like it was Bush all along.
Probably.
Look, I mean, Dick and Bush worked in the same office. Is anybody else seeing these dots connecting?
Dick and Bush.
So before we, without getting into other conspiracy stuff, I do think that there might be something worth examining around it. I don't think 9/11 was an inside job in the broad sense that people talk about. But if you look at weird things that happened during that day, like Building 7 or whatever it was, which was an IC shared building between the NSA, the CIA, and I believe the DIA, that was destroyed. No plane flew into it, but they said that there was a terrorist attack on it. There was an internal fire, and it's the only concrete structure that has ever collapsed from a fire in all of recorded history. That's kind of weird. Why would people like the NSA and CIA be destroying an operations center during a terrorist attack? Right? That's just strange.
The official story on Building 7 is that it was slated for destruction prior to 9/11, and then when debris started to fall on it on 9/11, they realized the structure had become unsound and needed to come down immediately. So they did the demo on 9/11 live in all of the chaos.
So, okay. That's obviously, I mean, your tone, you trying to keep a flat tone, but it was clear that you have a little bit of sarcasm in your voice. I think we all understand that there's some fuckery afoot with something there. Right? There's just
No
too much weird
sarcasm,
shit.
no fuckery there.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like when people talk about how like the jet fuel can't melt steel beams. There was thermite there, and then like I was googling it. And apparently, so like jet fuel burns at like 1,000 degrees like normally, but in compressed conditions, it will burn at a drastically higher temperature.
Yeah, so that one is literally just a myth. It doesn't need to burn that hot to melt it. You can bend steel beams without melting them.
Yeah.
And so it's actually quite easy to do. And in defense of the Building 7 thing that username said, most operations center, especially for the CIA, are rigged structures of their like their so that if they just have to bounce like immediately, they don't even have. There were problems that were happening in like Latin America during the 80s where they would have to leave a site really fast, and they would have to leave so fast that they didn't have enough time to shred all of their documents. And so they needed ways to just disappear effectively immediately, like within 5 minutes, and not leave behind any evidence. And so they took it upon themselves to uh, they undertook the practice of like a slash and burn technique. They just throw everything in a big fire pile and light it on fire, and then they have explosives rigged so that they can just collapse the building on top of it, which usually extinguishes the fire so that you don't have to worry about burning other buildings, but all of your evidence is gone really fast. So another way to look at this is that that building probably really was rigged to be demolished prior to 9/11, but it was probably rigged to be demolished decades later in an emergency situation, and the emergency situation happened much faster than they were anticipating.
Why would you rig a building in your most populous city to be destroyed? That doesn't make sense, right? Like what you're saying
Again,
is
just
true if you put a
absolute
building.
demolition of evidence. It doesn't matter where the building is. The evidence that or the documents that they have are so sensitive that they just need to get rid of them at a moment's notice.
I just don't buy it. I do not buy you build a building in New York City to be demolished like that. I don't
Well,
buy
I don't
it.
know if
I
they
don't
built
care
it.
who's in the building. But what I do know is that they were scheduling the demolition of building number 7. It had been condemned. A lot of buildings in New York at that time were being rebuilt because of asbestos and a whole bunch of other reasons. Like that's one of the big things that came out of 9/11 too, right? All of the health problems from the smoke in the city because you had asbestos coming down, you had asbestos burning, you had all of the toxic chemicals used in these buildings from the 1950s, right? Going up in flames and just destroying everybody's lungs. Like it's not at all weird that building 7 fell, especially given that like a chunk of the towers fell through the roof of building 7. Like it was right underneath the twin towers. It's not some building half mile away or isolated from this whole thing. It's right there. I just don't buy it. I'm not sure.
Well, then it was scheduled for demolition. I mean, it all of what you said makes sense. I guess the conspiracy side of my brain would be saying that it's strange that it was evacuated prior to that morning, right? So why would it be demoed? Well, it wasn't scheduled to be demoed that day, but they ended up doing it because of what you said their official narrative was, where they
The
it was
structural
unsafe.
damage because you had
Right.
pieces of the towers that fell through. It wasn't really safe to go back in at that point, or so they had deemed. In the chaos of everything, how they deemed that, I'm not totally sure. But if you have a building more or less prepped for demolition like that, and then it gets that type of damage, what are you supposed to do? Send people into a possibly unstable building after everything you've seen that day?
No, of course not. But again, it was also evacuated right before that. Which might be explainable for perfectly legitimate reasons. And in
I
fact, the
mean,
conspiracy side and the perfectly legitimate reason might end up being the same thing, like that they knew something was going to happen.
he said it was a condemned building, right? Wouldn't it make sense that you just wouldn't have people in condemned buildings? Or did they like actively evacuate people that morning who were
No, people were
supposed to
going
be
into
in
work
there?
that day. Yeah, they were in for work that day.
And they evacuated them before the attack?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Right, so it's just weird. Again, it seems like the conspiracy side ends up being the legitimate, valid reason side as well. Like, if you know something's going to happen, then you get the people out. And while that means that they might have known something was going to happen to other buildings, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have removed operatives and sensitive information. Right, so what they did makes sense. I mean, there were a lot of potential targets that day. It's hard to have known which ones needed, which ones were the highest priority. I was kind of expecting either more pushback or more agreements. You guys are giving kind of flaccid responses. I thought you guys would be more into the conspiracy ideas.
I've never found the Tower 7 discussion particularly important. I mean, I think the unfortunate thing is that there's a lot of weird things for which we'll never have clear answers, and sometimes you just have to make your peace with that.
Yeah, I
don't like
just
that, though.
never found it that interesting. There wasn't enough there that was compelling for me to find interest in it.
It was like,
Sorry,
what
I
am I
had
going to
that
do about
backwards.
JFK? It's like, I'd like to know more about the circumstances of his death. I mean, a fucking American president died. We just had a discussion about how America is the most powerful country ever. One of its presidents gets murdered in broad daylight, and we still don't have any clear answers about it.
Okay,
Like,
so I was kind of fucking around with the Building 7 thing, but I have a lot of information about the JFK thing that you might find interesting if you really want to go down that road. But I don't know if you want to do that conspiracy or keep this about 9/11 stuff.
I mean, I don't want to constrict too much, but yeah, it is kind of the topic of the night is 9/11. When JFK's birthday comes along or something, we can talk about him.
I suppose really briefly, as a single sentence, I could just say that through the Freedom of Information Act, and it is always impressive to me the way that the CIA does this. They'll release information usually on a Friday because of how the news cycle works, and they'll wait for for the news to latch onto a big story before they release anything, specifically so that all of their important releases go mostly under the radar of news media, both in America and internationally. It's also interesting that a lot of what they release acts as a double-edged sword where it's not a good description, or like a two-pronged fork, where they'll release multiple things at the same time that seem to conflict with each other, at least ideologically, so that it's hard to pin them as being focused on any specific agenda. And it's just fascinating to me how masterfully they control their PR in that sense. But through the Freedom of Information Act, for I think a week or two, they had opened, and it was linked directly on their landing page on CIA.gov. They had released a bunch of JFK files, and in the CIA's internal official reports that had to be released through, FOIA, they said that in their official reports there were 3 shooters that they identified, 2 of which were on CIA payroll. But it's not clear, they don't make distinctions or give details as to if the shooters were targeting the president or if they knew that there was a valid threat in the area. They just knew that there were 3 people that had fired at that time. So it's very, very interesting that they also just put that right on their landing page. And it was only there for like a week to meet the requirements of the Freedom of Information thing, and then they took it right back down.
The CIA would make great stock investors.
Yeah, they're fucking insane. I have like so much admiration for all the crazy shit they've done. Imagine that you have a literal bucket of LSD. Now, it takes a lot of LSD to have a bucket. And you pour this liquid LSD into a well in France. And again, you need a lot of LSD to pour it, right? If you're pouring LSD, you have so much of it. Like, it's hard to describe to somebody how much that is. And so they pour it into this well in France because they just wanted to see what would happen. That's about it. And for safe measure, they also dosed all of the bread that was being shipped into the town, just in case people decided not to drink water. They dosed all the bread, and then they just let that happen for like 3 weeks. You can imagine the number of bad trips because none of these people knew what was happening.
What was that operation called?
I actually don't. I don't know if it was a formal operation. I think that's partly why it was so bonkers. I think it was just part of one of the researchers that was working in there was like, "Hey, I'm gonna just do this." That happens a lot too.
I found a
They have some
reference
liberal.
to a Point Saint Esprit poisoning that has some people call the CIA Frenchtown acid event.
That's probably it.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it says nearly 60 years ago, a French town was hit by a sudden outbreak of hallucinations, which left 5 people dead and many seriously ill. For years, it was blamed on bread contaminated with a psychedelic fungus, but that theory is now being challenged, according to the BBC.
Yeah, the Atlantic says
Yeah.
it's likely false.
Yeah, the
the
official narrative, obviously,
I mean-
they don't admit to that.
The CIA is the boogeyman, literally the boogeyman. Everything that has ever happened in the past century is blamed on the CIA, even though the CIA was only formed in the 1950s.
Yeah,
Right,
and
so
I
that
mean,
specific
if you-
event, I'm not just saying that randomly from a random article. On our server, we've had a lot of members of like the intelligence community and stuff go through, and if you get an officer drunk at a bar, you can often get them to tell you like crazy stories like this of shit that they've done or that they've seen in their archives.
If you
That
get
one,
if you give a troll attention online, he'll tell you any story you want to hear too.
yeah, but it's not really where I'm going with this. That town is sort of like an open secret in the intelligence community, the American intelligence community, that that was on purpose. There are so it.
I mean, like,
understand
I know
the
some people
resistance
who.
to the idea,
I mean, like, I've met
but
people who actually did like work in like army intelligence. So like, I could ask somebody if they've
yeah,
heard of
Army
it.
does crazy shit too. The Army had weird like psychoacoustic studies that they did, I want to say in like the 70s, using like binaural. CIA did it at the same time as well, and I think the DIA was getting formed around that time. The Army did that, and so did the Navy. They did psychedelic studies and like psychoacoustic studies where you could manipulate people through effectively binaurals or hemispheric sync. The Army has all kinds of crazy shit that they've done, and so does the Navy. The Navy is a bunch of dudes on a boat with no women around and nothing to do. And they decided to, in their free time, because they were so bored, they decided to invent lasers and the internet. That's how fucking crazy naval intelligence is. Oh, and I think they synthesized scopolamine and I think peyote to use as a truth serum.
So, other 9/11 stories, thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, that got really off topic.
Yeah.
It's
You know what?
all connected.
Let's bring
Open
it
your
back to
eyes,
9/11.
sheeple.
Yeah,
Bring
because
it back to
it's been half an hour.
Okay, look, here's how it's connected. CIA at the time of the event that I was describing was also employing Osama bin Laden as an operative under the payroll of the CIA. Okay, you think this was off topic? Nuh-uh. this all comes full circle, I promise you. Now imagine giving freedom fighters in the Middle East who are anti-communist at the time guns and literature and political theory for how to be a revolutionary. Coming people who are running these psychedelic experiments and doing the drugs themselves, sometimes not even on purpose. There's a famous event in CIA history where some of the psychedelics researchers again poured a lot. Right, you have to have a lot to pour it. They poured it in the coffee makers in one of their main offices just to see what would happen to the office workers at CIA, right, at their headquarters. And these same people, right, are still employed at the time that they're sending. They're still, funding Bin Laden. I think that there is at least some crossover. There's some overlap in this Venn diagram. Okay.
But when you talk about CIA, you also have to recognize the plethora of misinformation presented both by the CIA in order to throw off the Ruskies, but also by the rest of the world to throw off people about what the CIA is actually up to.
For
There's
sure.
nothing more powerful than sowing mistrust in a people, sowing mistrust towards a government in a people. The Putin and the KGB, the foreign intelligence agencies, they all want us to think bad things about the CIA. The CIA wants us to think bad things about them, and the CIA wants them to be afraid of us. There's no way to make them more afraid of you than to claim you have a truth serum or some other set of highly um, covert drugs and weapons at your disposal that they don't have, right? So of course you're going to say, yeah, we put LSD in a bunch of stuff and it made people tell us the truth. The Russians don't know. They've not played with
So
LSD like that at that point. So it could all just be one giant bluff.
It annoys me very much when I
yeah.
hear people talking about, oh, the CIA supported Osama and then he turned on us. You know, that's what we do in geopolitics all over the place. We support those that may be advantageous to us at the moment, and then they might become our enemies in the future. Allies become enemies in the future. Our enemies become allies. Like, I don't understand why the CIA supporting Osama in the 80s has anything to do with 9/11. Like, I mean, obviously,
So
Osama used those skills or something, maybe,
so
use
two
those
things.
skills.
He didn't use those skills. He wasn't really the one who trained them. But you're right. Our enemy's enemy is our friend has been standard U.S. foreign policy for decades. But go on.
So
Yeah,
two things about the misinformation. One, you were saying that they want to be portrayed as evil for an advantage. I don't think any of this is bad. I find it. Uh, I I said that I
Hold on
admired
a
them
second,
earlier, and I
because
was quite serious.
be careful. I did not say evil. Powerful is what I said. You want them to think
Uh,
that you have more power.
well, you did say that. Excuse me. You did say that the word you used was afraid that people would be afraid of them or whatever,
I said they want the Ruskies to be afraid of their power, not that they are
right?
inherently an evil thing.
Or to fear them yet. But I don't think that this is something to fear. I think it happened. And then the second thing about it is that there's an easy way to check at least part of this. which is, do you think it's controversial that bin Laden was employed by the CIA? Is that misinformation? I don't think so. I think that's quite publicly understood. And the second thing is, did the CIA do a lot of this psychedelics research at that time? Is that misinformation, or did they actually do that research? Not necessarily like the village in France, but just psychedelics research in general. I think that's not controversial. They did do that. And then combine the two, did those happen around the same time? Well, as it turns out, they had been doing all kinds of psychedelic research long before they got to bin Laden. And so my point is, sane people, at least the high up people that are combining or orchestrating some of the projects that the CIA runs, we're doing both of those things, right? They're running psychedelics projects, and they're running foreign operations and foreign targeting, where they ended up hiring bin Laden. And so I'm saying that there's some connection here, in that these people who are exposed to, at the very, very minimal level, the psychedelics research, which is not to say the psychedelics themselves, although in my opinion that's highly likely that they were exposed to the psychedelics themselves. These same people are also the ones employing bin Laden. And so I think that there is some crossover as to how their judgment might have been affected. And I also think it's worth noting that bin Laden might have been exposed to psychedelics. So there is something that, there is a salient connection there that is not totally unrelated.
Well, one, the LSD stuff started back in the 50s and 60s, and it was well known by the 80s that this was a thing. It was rumored in the 80s the CIA was moving crack into cities. So if we want to talk about things the CIA may have allegedly been doing in the 80s, there's that. But it wasn't necessarily these two things are like I I don't see how you draw a connection between the CIA experimenting with like LSD and Osama bin Laden in the Middle East. He was just a puppet used to, organize resistance against the Soviets. That's all he was. He wasn't.
Sure.
He wasn't some crazy like piece of the puzzle. It wasn't that he was something they were going to use years later as a puppet for their own 9/11 attack. And we
Sure.
knew all this about bin Laden too in 95 when he bombed the World Trade Center the first time, right? So, like, it's not that far fetched to say Osama bin Laden was obsessed with the World Trade Center because of the symbolism involved. You have that quote that he had about America being a democracy to justify all of his terrorist actions. He was very big on symbolism. He really wanted to hit the U.S. in a way that was going to catch attention. Everybody knew this. Everybody knew that Al Qaeda was a real threat in the late 90s. It was just ignored because, as Joe pointed out, we were in this pseudo golden age where the biggest problem we had as a country was our president getting blown under the Oval Office table. Like that was it. That was the thing in the 90s. That was it. There was small wars in the Baltics. The collapse of the Soviet Union clearly led to a lot of economic hardship in Eastern Europe, in former Soviet states, and even in Asia. Balkans, yeah. And we benefited from all that, so we really didn't have this concept anymore of a broader world that was dangerous to us. Like the first real awakening back to the fact that the world was a dangerous place in the 90s was Columbine. Columbine happened, and suddenly it became very clear that anybody could be shot at any point in time, even if you were in the safest place you could imagine, a school. And then you get into the psychology of that, and you get, a mere couple of years down the road, and suddenly one Tuesday morning, you're running out from downtown Manhattan because, like, the two tallest buildings in the city have just been hit by jumbo jets, and you don't know if there are more jets coming into the city. It's maybe the CIA did it, probably not. Maybe this is all some grand conspiracy, probably.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to close shit under conspiracy at that level. Sorry, I don't know if I was not being clear on that. I don't believe that 9/11 was actually an inside job. That was a joke earlier. What I'm saying about all this other stuff is that the the main intelligence agency that runs and orchestrates or operates all of our foreign intelligence operations is the CIA. And they're the ones most heavily involved in psychedelics research, which is not limited to LSD. They've done all kinds. The point that I was trying to make there was that the people that are most closely the senior management that was most closely related to these projects were exposed to both, and so yeah, they just hired Bin Laden as a anti-Soviet fighter. But why were they trying to hire anti-Soviet fighters in the Middle East anyways? Right, a lot of these people are still in the intelligence community to this day from the 80s. So my point was that the people, and it doesn't have to be a conspiracy either. It doesn't have to be orchestrated. I shouldn't have used that word. I'm just saying these are the same people that are still running all this shit, and giving the green light on these like weird shit that they do. And it doesn't seem to be outwardly justified under the cloche of American interest. It seems very much an internal thing that they're doing because they want to.
I'm not sure what you're saying now, but being anti-Soviet in the Middle East during the 80s was American foreign policy of containment.
Yeah, but they didn't need to hire Bin Laden for that.
They probably threw money at whoever would take it. I would. Yeah, basically. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say it was not just Bin Laden we threw money at in the Middle East. And it wasn't just money, it was weapons, it was logistics. There was a lot of support given to a lot of groups to oppose the Soviets and to oppose communism through containment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Bin Laden. I mean, I would be surprised if Bin Laden was anything super special, right? Like anybody who would raise arms against the Soviets.
A Mujahideen commander once said that the only thing that we Afghans need to fight the Soviets is the Quran and more stingers.
Yeah, I like the way that pause does it.
But it's in the original video. There's also a pause, and apparently in the transcript for like his actual quote, there's a pause, so it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's no mystery why the CIA would hire Bin Laden. Like Bin Laden, why wouldn't they hire Bin Laden? What are they supposed to look into the future and know Bin Laden would bomb us? Yeah, I mean, he may or may not like the U.S., but neither does did half the Middle East in the 80s, right? Like the Middle East was like a bunch of countries. Some of them aligned with the Soviets, some of them aligned with the U.S., some of them aligned. Some of them kept both so that they can get the most money out of either of them, and that's the leadership. Then you had the people, and the leaders and the people were like playing this political game against each other, right? Like the leaders were always trying to push pan-Arabism, but didn't want pan-Arabism themselves. And so you had people who were like anti-Israel, but the leaders weren't as anti-Israel as their rhetoric was, but they used Israel as a tool to unify their people. But they wouldn't. At times they wouldn't go to war with Israel. At times they when they promised to, and that made their people angry. At times they were forced to go to war because they promised to. Because that's how they stayed in power, by bashing Israel, or part of how they stayed in power. And Israel was seen as an ally of the U.S. past some point at least, and so all this was very complicated. But like so therefore, Bin Laden probably did not like the U.S., but he didn't like the Soviets more at that point in time. So I don't see like so many people that we pay or do stuff with aren't our best friends at all points in time. I don't see why the U.S. should have been weary of Bin Laden more than anybody else.
Yeah. What I was saying was not the suggestion that any conspiracy theorist believes that the CIA can see the future, unless you like believe in like their mind control experiments or something. What I was saying was merely that they do have a commanding overview of what's happening during the present time, and that was true in the 80s as much as it was during 9/11. So, in defense of the conspiracy theorists, I think it would be fair to say that the CIA probably had uh, reasonable levels of evidence and knowledge of what might have happened that day, and they had their building evacuated that morning. And so, if you want to paint them in a bad light, you could say that maybe they should have, let other people in on that bit of information. They could have saved many more lives.
Yeah, I mean, we
But
do
I don't
know. I mean,
particularly
the
care about
9/11
that.
Commission at least claims that like lots of intel, including the CIA and FBI, they were like following some of the terrorists or whatever. So like they knew
Yeah.
about a lot of it, but they just didn't put it together in time or some such. So I wouldn't be surprised if like various agencies figured it out just too late, kind of thing.
Right. No, I think that's what actually happened. But what I've heard conspiracy theorists argue, or at least a couple of them, is that they in fact did put it together in time, which is why they had the building evacuated that morning.
I see. Well, that's a much
I
more
personally don't
plausible
believe that, but
theory. That's actually a much more plausible conspiracy theory compared to the ones I usually hear. I can believe
yeah,
that.
I personally don't believe that. But that's I I was probably very unclear earlier. I didn't believe most of what I was saying about the connection between the psychedelics and Bin Laden. I was just trying to defend what I had heard before, and further, I was defending myself against the claim that it was totally unrelated and that we were off topic, because I didn't think that was true. But
So, any 9/11 stories?
I don't know how much of a story it is, but my brother's father-in-law was in one of the buildings, and and yeah, he managed to. He was pretty high up, and he managed to get down just in time, or almost just in time, and yeah, he got onto. I don't remember. He got onto the cover of some big magazine. I can't remember the picture because they photographed him coming out with his suit and tie. Yeah. But it was a big shock for the
It's pretty
family.
crazy.
do you guys think that with gigapixel AI, which is effectively like zoom and enhance, that we can go back through the footage of 9/11 attacks?
Well,
AI machine learning.
somebody went through like all of the 9/11 footage that was like posted, and they've upscaled them to 4K.
Oh, so they have done that.
Yeah, somebody there was a thread of it on Twitter. I only saw a screenshot of them doing it, so I didn't see like the thread themselves. But yes, like somebody's already gone through the footage and like has upscaled it to 4K.
But the problem with upscaling like that is that it's not necessarily accurate. Right.
Sure, I mean there's a lot of stuff to it than just like increasing pixel count. I would need to actually like look at the source.
But in general, like those things are not good for anything like evidence or anything like that.
Oh, for sure. I was just wondering if, and apparently it's been done, that we now have high quality footage of something that happened in a time where nobody's digital cameras filmed in high quality. So that's pretty crazy.
Well, it's not really high quality footage is the point. It's you have the same grainy footage, and then you separate the pixels by however much you want, and backfill in between using gradients in the pixel coloration and textures. So like
I don't think it's only that though, because they are using learning technique to add in new information rather than information from what's already
you
there.
might be able to use machine learning to do something slightly more advanced, but you will always be limited to whatever the resolution you originally had was. If you have chemical photographs, right, like actual chemical photography, then you can get out better resolution. But if you have any sort of digital photos from back then, like they will still be stuck in whatever digital resolution you have.
Well, machine learning can make. I mean, I have some like knowledge about this. Machine learning can make it look realistic, but it will be bullshitting basically. So if you want to, if you want it to look good, it'll look fine. It'll look better. You can make it look better, but it'll basically be filling it in like from memory, right? Like a person might from. So you train machine learning on a bunch of photos, and then it tries to look like this is mostly how machine learning would do it. Basically, you train a machine learning on a bunch of other photos, like a giant data set of photos, and then this is a poor way of explaining it, but basically for every neighborhood of pixel, it would try to remember a similar neighborhood in the training set. And then say, when I downsampled it from the training set, it looked like this one, like this destination pixel. So probably the rest of it, I can upsample it to look like that neighborhood as well. So
Right.
yeah, but it's going to be completely bullshit. It's going to be stuff from it makes up from its memory that it knows that humans will be okay if it will believe that this is a real image if I fill in this information. But it's not going to be like evidence, right? It's not going to be evidence. I'm not talking about court evidence, but though that too. But it's not going to be evidence useful uh, um, to your eyes of anything useful.
So
It's not real, is what it is.
you guys are talking about upscaling in general, but what I brought up specifically was gigapixel AI, which is a combination of these techniques that you've discussed and some others. And if you look at a low scale or low resolution, low fidelity, excuse me, video compared to what it upscales to, it's not random or arbitrary or just kind of looks good at a distance. It's incredibly accurate,
No, I
and
didn't
it
say
could
it
be
looks
used
good
as
at a
evidence.
distance. Oh, you're saying it could be used as evidence?
Yeah, in a court, at least Gigapixel can, specifically because of how it works. I mean,
So
I don't think legally it would be allowed in court right now, but if I mean you, it's scarily accurate.
I see some talk that maybe the 4K. I've seen two things talking about 4K images. One of them is apparently there was a documentary that came out on the 1st on Netflix. It was like 9/11, something like the terror or whatever. Apparently that uses 4K images. And then something about someone like spent a lot of time trying to upscale the image or the footage to 4K. I haven't found like where that is.
So just as another uh, explanation for how good this is, Gigapixel AI is not just upscaling where it's using prior images of similar content or sources to try to find out upscale. They've taken things like one of the example videos they have on their landing page is Deep Space Nine, a Star Trek episode, and they upscaled it from what was 480p when it was originally aired on television into a 4K video, and it looks like real 4K. There's no artifacting. There's none of that shit going on.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's standard, right? Like that's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
The
it looks
account-
great. It looks believable, but the inserted data is not accurate. Like if you would use that to like the best test case is if you had like a piece of paper that you could hardly see what it says on the paper, and you zoom in on the piece of paper and then start reading from it. It would well, depending on the technique, it would either be gibberish or it would if it's a very good machine learning algorithm, then it might be readable, but it wouldn't be. It would be readable, but not what it said, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense, but what I'm seeing this program or this application achieve is it is making things readable somehow.
Well, you mean like text?
Yeah.
Okay, but it does. Okay, look, maybe I'm not. I might not be up to date on the latest stuff, but I'm telling you that standard machine learning techniques can.
No, you're totally right. I agree with you that certainly under the techniques that we've discussed so far, that's not normally possible. You can't have a bunch of random white and black pixels and then it knows, oh, it says hello world. Like it would be very difficult for it to reverse engineer that if it's really low fidelity. However, what I'm seeing, at least in these videos on its landing page, is that's effectively what they are achieving. And so, yeah.
It's pretty interesting to look at DS9 remastered clips in 4K and like, oh, yeah, this looks great. Except, my monitor is not a 4K monitor, so I can only see it.
Yeah, well, you're watching the video on YouTube probably in 1080p, not 4K, right? So you're still getting the effect of upscaling it.
Yeah.
So I think where the confusion lies, you're getting a crisper image, but you're not adding new information. The information is always there, even in the text example, right? The information's there. It's there in a blurred way. It's sub resolution, but the information is there. If you go and this is known, you can do this for decades, or it's been done for decades. If you go do astrophotography and you take 2,000 images of Mars, you can overlay those 2,000 images and increase your quote unquote increase your resolution, but you won't see any features that were not originally there in the original 2,000 images you took, right? So in the case of like, let's say a image of an eye, you have many different features around the eye and inside the eye that if you truly could add information, you would expect to be able to pull out. But if you can't add the information, you'll never see them, right? All you'll see is whatever was in the original photo de-blurred. Like de-blurring algorithms are nothing new, and this whole idea of like upscaling images really does follow some advanced version of like de-blur, backfilling of pixels, and then training an AI to add in intelligently what needs to be added in. But you're only going to be able to work with the information that's there, or any new information you try to add isn't going to be based on like anything in the picture because it's not there. That's just sort of how these things work. And that's why I think Reels keep saying you can't use it in a court of law, because if you think you see something, you will have a really hard time proving that what you're seeing is not just noise that's enhanced into a feature as opposed to a real feature that was necessarily there and then
Right.
just
So
de-blurred out.
it seems like there's a contradiction here. If there's no new information, right? If it's not adding new information, then what it has revealed would be applicable as evidence because you're using something that's true. It's not made up.
I'm not really sure on that end, but I think if it is something you can prove is true, then yes. If it is something that is more artificially done by an AI in order to make it look good at the like level of the tiny details, then probably not.
So there's a few. I have some more experience here. With the astronomy stuff. So yeah, if you have multiple pictures, at slightly, even at the same angle, I think. If you have multiple pictures of the same thing, and at the same angle inside the atmosphere, I think you could probably, or even at the same angle outside the atmosphere. I'm not 100% sure on that. You get more information. You do get more information from each exposure. So you can combine. You could actually take 2,000 photos and of the same thing, and combine them and get a zoomed in image, an accurate zoomed in image. And that's how many telescopes
Yeah,
work nowadays. Sorry.
yes, I've done this. I've done this many times now. It just as a hobby, and like what it really comes down to is you get distortion from the atmosphere, but that distortion is random noise. Anytime
Right.
you have a
That,
series of
yeah. Oh,
images
cool.
in which you
That's what
have
I was getting.
random
Yeah.
noise, right? Like
Okay,
you
go
can
ahead.
cancel random noise like that.
Yeah.
And then that gets you more. Yeah, go on.
And the noise can help you.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
noise, yeah, because then it's not the same exact image. Yeah.
So yeah, you're using all of the commonalities in the images in order to backtrack what should be there. And I think that's exactly what you were describing before with AI training against many different images. It's essentially training to learn probably what is your noise or what is the blur or what is the interference or what is the
No,
perspective
that's so
losing.
much simpler. That's so much simpler. Like, I it's actually worth blowing your minds over how in painting works. Have you guys ever heard of in painting?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I don't understand the process, but
Yeah, I'll just tell you the process because it's something that like opens your mind once you understand the process. Like so many more things seem possible, at least for me. Basically, so this is not machine learning. Machine learning can do in painting, but like basic in painting algorithm works in the following process. Basically, imagine you have an image, and I started like blocking out like with the color black like parts of the image, and I want you to fill in the black parts that I blocked out. But obviously you can't fill it in with what I blocked out because that information is gone. But what you can do is possibly fill it in with stuff that looks that'll make it look good, right? And it'll be an image that looks real. It'll look good. So how would you go about this? So the way in painting goes about this is it breaks up the entire photo into let's say 5x5 pixel neighborhoods, little squares of 5x5 pixels, and then it picks a pixel that in the blocked out image that it wants to fill in. So it picks a pixel, usually at the corner, like at a border where it's blocked out and where it's not blocked out, and then it takes that neighborhood. I could actually just find a photo of this. Okay, in painting. It takes that neighborhood. Now, half of that neighborhood, it's a 5x5 neighborhood. Half the neighborhood is filled in because it's at the border, and half of it is black. And then it goes and searches through all the neighborhoods in the entire image and tries to find the closest looking neighborhood to that neighborhood. And when it finds somewhere else in the image that looks almost like this part of the image, then it says, what's in the center of that neighborhood, of that part of the image? And if it's like green, it says, okay, well, I'm going to fill in the black pixel with green because it was good somewhere else in the image. It'll be good here. So it just does that over and over again. And what you end up with is a photo that fills in the missing parts by transplanting other parts of the photo that look that look like those parts, and therefore it if it looks good somewhere else in the photo, it'll look good there. That's the logic, and it works really nicely.
all this talk in neighborhoods, basically what you're saying is that when the AI becomes sentient, it's going to believe in segregation. That's what you're telling me.
So I just posted in general an example of what it could do. That let me just find another thing with the neighborhoods.
Did you? I don't see it in general.
General one text.
General shit. There's like 5 general channels in this server. My bad.
Sorry about that. Or here's another one. But let me see if I can. Here's an example of. No, I'm trying to find
This is
an example of the
interesting.
neighborhood comparison.
Joe left like 2 minutes into us talking about this. I want everybody to realize, again, not totally off topic. I am curious in this technology for its use in enhancing video of 9/11 jumpers, so I can watch people jump out of the building in high definition. Right, this is still directly relevant.
Joe actually didn't leave. He's
That is-
also the IDW community.
Oh no! Of course, I mean, I would never suggest. I would never suggest that
Just
Joe
so
had a
you
fault.
know.
That is some gallows humor. Okay.
How pretentious is that? He is the IDW community. Anyways,
Wheels, was it you talking earlier about how it has a lot of commonalities with vectorization blur removal technology? Was that you?
No, I did
literally
not.
nobody's.
No,
Okay,
somebody
well,
mentioned
like,
that.
whoever
was
said that,
using-
it's interesting to note that it's like literally the exact same technology.
But there's actually other types of blur removal. Sorry?
We were doing that without AI in 2007, so I don't know why you would need AI to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the exact same technique.
No, so
I
what
think
I was
username was saying that, and then Reels is saying that you don't need the AI to do it.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
I was explaining
check
in
it out.
painting. Yeah, the thing I was just explaining is in painting, which is pretty old. For blur removal, I don't know. I know that you could just use a filter. There are filters that you can do blur removal with. But that's only if it's a perfect blur.
I wrote a blur removal algorithm in 2010 in Fortran 90. So like
What
de-blur.
In Fortran,
That's
wow.
excellent, dude.
Oh God,
Anybody
you're
still
asking
use
me to
Fortran?
remember? You're asking me to remember. I don't remember, but I remember we had a couple different techniques we had to do it with. Most of them you can do if it's not blurred beyond a certain point. But it's not just deep blur, right? Like there is all sorts of different computational simple algorithms to take and break your lattice apart and fill in information. And you can do it, and you can think of doing it the dumbest way possible, and then just say, I am going to incrementally do this one step smarter until you get to whatever we have like now, which I have no doubt can take my old grainy 240p like childhood memories and make them 4K ultra resolution. But I will die on the hill that you will not add new information to that image because it would just simply violate the laws of like the universe.
Okay, two things on that. The first is going to be super off topic, but I'm curious since you guys seem to have some working knowledge of this or experience with this. If let's say you have an image and you put it in Photoshop, it's just, I don't know, a selfie, a picture of your face, and you apply like the Gaussian blur effect to it. Gaussian blur works off of a function, a known function. Would it be possible to reverse the blur of that newly rendered image, not just through some algorithm that you make, but to reverse it absolutely so that you can get the exact original image? Would that be possible?
Even if you knew the factor, there's too much pixel mashing at that point. You could shrink the image and do it.
Okay. So for cryptography purposes, that is not a Gaussian blur is not considered secure because there are papers on reversing it. The problem with doing
Amazing.
it mathematically is that it goes off the ends. That's pretty. So you like a Gaussian blur has like a window, usually something like if you're gonna blur it, if you want to blur it very heavily, it's gonna be either a big window or applied many times with a small window. So, but the result is the same, is that it affects pixels off the end of the image, which will get cropped in the final image. And therefore, to undo it, you would need that stuff, which would disappear. However, to undo it perfectly. However, to undo it imperfectly, enough to see what's behind the Gaussian blurs is possible, and therefore blurring someone's face with Photoshop or whatever is not considered a secure method of anonymization. And
That's amazing to me. That's crazy. Sorry for the off-topic thing. More back on topic to what username was saying. So if you want to get into some really pedantic nerd shit, which I actually suggest you guys do, you can look up what are called mereological problems, which is mereology is a subfield of metaphysics and academic philosophy. It,
Zach,
superficially,
Zach, I'm not making this up. I'm literally sorting my Jordanian currency by year. I can't fucking believe you're saying, "Hey, do you want to get into some really nerdy shit?"
Your what currency?
Jordanian currency, like currency from the country of Jordan. I'm sorting it by year.
Cool.
I don't know if that's pedantic nerd shit or if that's pseudo autistic.
Dude, definitely both. It's definitely both.
Fair enough. But mereological issues, superficially, they can seem kind of dumb because, broadly speaking, you can frame mereology as like how many socks make a pile. However, when I took a class in mereology, the example that the more concrete example they used was actually about 9/11. And so this will come full circle. I promise this will make sense by the end. But my initial resistance that I want to give to username is about whether or not we should be calling this new information, right? So the composite images that Reels and you were talking about username, to me it seems like that would be new information. And you might say, well, of course, all of the pixel points, all of the data were in the images beforehand. But the final render, the image that you end up with, is none of the images that you started with. It's a new image. And so depending on how you wanted to dice that up, you could say that's new information. As to whether or not that's truly new information, it is debatable. And this is the topic of mereology. As another, so if you wanted to like look up issues with mereology, it would be something interesting to look into. I don't have much more to say on it. Beyond that, I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight as to whether or not it really is new information, but you might find it interesting.
I think
consider that. Hold on, let me push back on that since I was directly pushed back on there for a second. Consider the following: if you have a 512 by 512 CCD camera and you have light coming through your set of optics, and the light reaches the camera, it's going to trigger the CCDs that generates and renders your image. Right? The information is always there in the form of the light, and then the image somehow is a reflection of all of that information that was in the light. However, because of the finite size of the CCD camera, because of the finite number of points that we can collect data on,
Those are called photo sites.
Photo sites, thank you.
Little pixels on the sensor, those are called photo sites.
Because of the finite number of those we get a finite amount of information into the image, and we get some amount of information that is quote unquote lost or just distorted in the image. Like this idea of getting more information out of that image, the information was always there, right? It's just that it wasn't obvious that it was there before. Like you can think about taking even unfocused images of different things, right? And then reconstructing a focused image from all of these different unfocused images. Like just because the image wasn't focused, you still have the information there. And going back to like the example before of astrophotography, your whole planet isn't always in the plane of focus. And so that's effectively what you're doing in some sense as well. You're adjusting for all of these little things that make it so that you don't have perfect information coming through the image, though the information is always there in how the photons sort of create your image, right? So it's not, I don't see it as new information. I see it as revealing hidden information that was always there. Anyway,
Okay.
continue.
So,
go ahead.
Because information transfers or is synthesized, you seem to be saying that it is no longer, it's not new information. It was always there. However, I would like you to consider that this is a classic problem in metaphysics or in philosophy generally, in many different fields of philosophy, where if the example is typically like you can have somebody who's a color researcher, right? They can read everything that there is to know. They can do all the mathematical equations that's possible for how light works and how color works. But if they're colorblind, there's still information that they're missing. Unless they experience the quality of seeing red, they won't have all the possible information that they could have about the color red, even if they have all the other written information that you could possibly write about it. And as a more direct example of why this is a problem, for not saying that it's new information, if you really think that there's no new information from synthesized data, then there's also kind of like no point in synthesizing the data, because you're not making anything new. You don't need to invent anything anymore.
No, if
Right?
you're
Like you,
if you're
and you
adding
already know it.
no, if you're synthesizing data, then you're adding information for sure, but it's not accurate information of the original thing.
Well, I'm glad that you agree, but it seems to think that there is no new information there.
No, I think what he means is if you manage to enhance something correctly, then you never added information. It was always in the original thing.
Oh,
Like
that's
the
what
old,
he meant, then sure.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Reels on that. I think the point you bring up is a good one, though, from a philosophical standpoint, but from the objectivist view of uh, reality-based physics, the quality of the color is always there, encoded in the wavelength of the light that's reflected, right? You can argue that maybe the brain interprets things differently, whatever. There's whole ideas of philosophy based on known versus unknown information, and that's great. But from like the objective reality standpoint of image analysis, either the information is there to get out of the image or it is not.
Yeah, so as far as rendering an image through digital processing, I think we're all on the same page now. But as far as what you just said about uh, maybe implied disconnect between philosophy and objective reality, I would say that physics historically has been so directly and completely informed by philosophy that this would be a mischaracterization to think that this issue with qualia in philosophy is somehow distinct or unrelated to the issue with whether or not you can get the
Physics
information of red.
Well, I think you can answer
experimental.
that problem. I think you can answer that problem as it applies to these data sets without philosophy, because I think I wouldn't use an AI for it, but I firmly believe that you could enhance an image through synthesis without adding information. And I can give you a technical explanation of why that is. If you use an algorithm that takes a video of someone robbing an ATM, like a video of their face, which would give you a data set of like 2,000 frames while they're like, hacking it open or whatever. And this is an algorithm that I've actually used. You can take the video and turn it into a high resolution photo, because as they move, they fill out information in the field. And you might be thinking like, okay, how can you combine a bunch of pictures of a person's face to make a higher resolution face
Reels has
without
already
adding-
given several examples of that
no,
exact.
but this is exactly the same as the astronomy stuff that username is talking.
Yeah, it's not the same because it's a video, but that's why you have such a big data set. The way that you increase the resolution is that the pixels get blocked differently by the video compression throughout the video. So what you're doing is you're looking for the pixel groups, and you're able to remove the effects of like MPEG compression, for example, artifacting. Any kind of pixel blocking gets removed the more different images you have, and the more he moves around too. So you can
That's one
take
effect.
all of those, and you don't add any information. You're cutting
Yeah,
information.
there's actually many effects happening there. In astronomy, it's called interferometry, I think. Like
Interferometry.
Interferometry. Exactly.
Interferometry, yeah.
But that's much more advanced than just removing JPEG blocks or whatever. Yeah, but that's another interesting effect that I never thought of before. But there's also
So
this like
you're
go ahead.
making a composite image by combining by looking
so
through and scanning many previous images in this video, but it's still a composite image nonetheless, an
Well, yeah,
upscaled
because
one.
as a compositor, you have to think of it in terms of layers. So you've just taken one field and you've layered over like 1,000 images onto this one field,
and
and then you just start subtracting stuff.
Was the point of topic not composite images made via algorithm that Reels and user said?
No, I
'Cause to
joined
me,
late.
okay, well, they said that it's not the same thing.
Well, I
Whereas to
don't
me,
believe
it seems
that.
like very
I'm
much
just
the
saying,
same
like,
thing. It's a composite image being made.
there are definitely ways to do it without adding information, because like I've done it, and you don't need
Wait,
if you
wait.
don't need an AI to do it. I don't think
No,
you're
no,
adding.
no. There's a bunch of mischaracterizations happening here. What we were talking about before, originally, was one image, and then
and removing blur from it, yeah.
not just removing blur, just we
Much
were
before
talking about gigapixel AI and the fact that somebody enhanced the 9/11 videotapes and
Right.
to 4K or whatever, and would such an enhancement be accurate? Now, if somebody just enhanced it frame by frame, I would say those enhancements would not be accurate. However, it might be possible to enhance using interframe, multiple frames to enhance the image, but I doubt it. It would be very difficult to enhance somebody jumping out of a building, enhancing their face, I think, because like you get a couple of pixels and it's moving and changing shading, changing everything constantly, right? I doubt it. I doubt you would be able to get anything useful out of that.
Well, what Aquato's
think-
saying is
well-
you might be able to.
Yeah,
If you get
the same
enough
technique-
video.
yeah, the same technique that you can use to combat the loss of information that's going to occur when you're getting a video of someone's face and you're losing it all to pixel blocking. You can do that same method on motion blur, just like a shutter effect. Even if all the settings of the camera were perfect. And then like
Right,
you
but
could
what
do
about
you could do
turning
it for
2 by
Gaussian
2
blur too, but then you just have to realize like, you're
What about
gonna
turning
lose
2 by 2
quality by
pixels
doing
of a face
the
into
one that already has a
8 by
blur
8?
on it.
Aquatic, what about turning 2 by 2 into 8 by 8 or 2 by 2 into 32 by 32?
Are you talking about the
hold
subpixel
it.
ratio, or are you wait 2 by 8? What's 2 by 8?
Hold
Is that
on
We're
a
talking
second,
about
guys.
taking a very
Can we
bad
slow
video
down?
of like from a
Is it
video from a
subpixel ratio
phone.
for color?
No, ratio of pixels. Right?
Oh, for
Upscaling.
the whole image, like the dimensions of the whole image?
Yeah. We're talking
Why does
about
that matter?
turning like a 240p into 4K.
Oh. Well, usually that's done with vectors where like they look at where a pixel moves, and it's similar to the way that you would do like a vectorization based
Yeah, maybe for a
motion
face
blur,
that's facing the
something like
camera,
that.
but we're talking about somebody falling out of a building.
Yeah, you know what, dude? I don't know. I actually don't know enough about, because that's more for like photo people, and although people are starting to use that for video, I guess. Yeah, you do see that a ton. I just haven't done that yet.
Yeah, well, guys, just slow down, relax. We're going a mile a minute here, and we're going in circles. You can absolutely enhance resolutions. You can absolutely get. I firmly believe if you have a good enough video, even if it's 240p and the face is only 5 to 10 pixels total, say, right, of a person jumping out of a building, you could reverse image. You could get their face out. You could, right?
Okay,
If you have,
what you could do is you could get a
have,
still out of it
Amazing.
higher quality than the
because
video. That you could do, and you wouldn't have to add information to do that. You wouldn't have to add any information to do that.
The video is just a series of images. So if I have 50,000 video frames, right, of this guy falling from the top of the World Trade Center because it was a long fall, how many of them have his face in it? How many, like, I don't
So
know.
what
But
we
I
are
suspect
saying
there
here
could be.
today is that tomorrow we will have high resolution footage of these jumpers where we can zoom so far in with so much fidelity that we can see the tears streaming off of their face as they plunge to their deaths. And I am
Dude,
fully erect.
Definitely. A lot of people think the reason tears evolved is because they can be seen from miles away.
No, you won't see the tears. You're still
We're going a
limited
mile
by
a minute,
refraction.
but he fell a mile a minute. We are back on topic.
If it's reflecting light, yes, you could definitely see a tear on someone's face, probably in the footage we have today, if it was reflecting light, like direct. It was a sunny day.
Yeah, okay, so it has to be within like it has to be larger than the minimum feature size that you can actually distinguish with whatever optics you're using to do the imaging, though, still, right?
Well,
Like, I don't think you get.
the tier could be smaller than that. The tier could be smaller than that because all the tier would have to do is reflect sunlight directly into the camera. Then you would definitely see it. Like if it reflected sunlight directly. into
Here's
the camera.
something else to reflect on. I do actually want
No,
to bring this closer to topic.
Sorry, one more thought on that. If the tier is hitting the camera and it's hitting 1 pixel, right? That same pixel, right, could be being hit by everything around the tier, and the total intensity will be larger. Or sorry, the total intensity will drown out the intensity of the tier to the point where you might not be able to back the information out.
Yes, but
Or
because
you
it has to go through the lens, if you have a tier that's reflecting light directly into the sensor, it's going to take up more than 1 pixel. So yes, you're not going to be able to resolve the tier, but you're definitely going to be able to detect the tier. Like
Isn't that how they distinguish between stars and galaxies when they do scans of the sky?
I mean, depends on what equipment you're using. I think
Well,
most
no,
people,
I mean, maybe
think
Reels
most
would
people
know about this.
Well,
If it's a galaxy, the light's too bright to resolve to a single pixel, and that's why when you look at like NASA photos of like stars out in space, some of them will look like plus signs, like really bright ones, and they take up more than 1 pixel. That's not a star, that's a galaxy, and that's how you can tell the difference by looking at a photo. The digital resolution and inability to resolve to a single pixel is how you can instantly tell whether or not that dot in the sky is its own star or an entire galaxy.
I'm pretty sure they also sell special diffraction gratings to help you resolve stars. Like, I'm pretty sure I've seen that on Amazon somewhere.
It's really interesting.
Well, I mean, if you just go based off of the luminance, you don't need to render it in order to check it. So generally, they're looking at data tables and they're just going to say, like, that's too low luminance to be a star. So I'm going to throw it out because it's a galaxy and I study stars. That's what FOSSA does.
Oh, wait.
Well, no,
Wait. FOSSA. Wait, are you and FOSSA like related to each other?
By as in like a relationship, not by blood. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember this whole conversation we had. Okay,
It's an
yeah. So
interesting way to
now I
ask the
remember
question.
O'Dowd. So FOSSA works for O'Dowd,
Yes.
and writes. What does she do? She writes scripts, or what does she do?
Yeah, she wrote the script for like a year. She's no longer the writer for that show.
Does she still work there? I'm curious.
No. I mean, he's not even based in, but yeah, he actually, this is one of the things I actually respect about the show. Like in other forms of entertainment, this would be points off, but he actually does outsource that usually to one science writer at a time who will have a contract for a couple months. And I think that's cool because most of the episodes are written by actual scientists, not Matt O'Dowd, like specialists in those
what
fields.
show are you talking about?
He used to do a lot more star stuff, but then he started doing like time crystals and stuff like that. And he doesn't restrict himself to star stuff. Again, I think that's a good thing. But
What
she
show
was
is this?
doing it remotely back when we
PBS
first moved to the
Space
city. Space Time, yeah.
Which I like a lot. I stopped watching YouTube, so I haven't seen him in like 5 months or so. But when I managed to get it, when I managed to port all of his shows to another platform, I will binge it.
Noise.
Okay, to bring this back to topic, I doubt Joe cares or is even here. But the mereological thing I gave, and I don't know, you guys seem somewhat disinterested. Again, superficially, it seems dumb. Like, how many socks make a pile? Why would you care about defining things like that? However, when 9/11 happened, this is an example you'll see a lot of times when initially studying mereology. When 9/11 happened, the person that owned the buildings had terrorist insurance. He had insurance for terrorist attacks, and I believe a terrorist attack that demolished his buildings would get him something like $1.5 billion. I think it was something like that, $1 billion to $1.5 billion. That's what he was supposed to get, maybe somewhere around there. We'll say $1 billion for the sake of this example. But he sued the insurance company because they only wanted to pay him.
I'm sorting the now.
He sued the insurance company because they only paid him for one attack. But he contended that there were 2 terrorist attacks that day. 2 different planes at 2 different times for 2 different buildings. That counts as 2 different events. And so he should get paid $2 billion of just $1 billion.
What was the policy, a fixed rate, or was it for the damage?
It was $1 billion for a terrorist attack that would destroy his property.
I see.
And he in his case was that he had 2 properties that experienced 2 separate terrorist attacks. So his payout should have been $1 billion each. And so this stupid question of how many socks make a pile ended up being a $2 billion question. And the way that it resolved in court, if I remember correctly, was that it only counted as 1 terrorist attack. So 9/11 is 1 terrorist attack, not multiple. But this issue is really not, we would call it new information from something synthesized. It's the same, fundamentally it's the same problem. So anyways, did you like that? Do you like how I fucking silver-tongued my way back into this somehow being about 9/11?
Hilarious.
9/11 stonks.
Yeah, my parents about 9/11 as a personal story. My parents are very they're decently intelligent people. They're smart cookies. And you know, they were kind of upset about what happened, as most people were at the time. But my mom, being very, very financially savvy for lots of reasons, she said, "Wow, we're going to make a lot of money." And I remember my dad saying, "What?" And she said, "Look at look at these Boeing stocks.
Yup.
They're so far down." And my dad said, I think he said, "God bless America," and they clicked the buy button.
Wow. Romantic.
Yeah, there's a good handful of people.
Was that on the old E-Trade platform of the late 90s?
I'm exaggerating. I think they had a broker that they called. They had somebody that managed their money.
No, dude, they had a VPN. Oh, dude, that's
2001? No, they didn't.
Anyone who didn't do that at the beginning of coronavirus is fucked. Although, unfortunately, the stocks didn't go up. Like the airline stocks, dude, they didn't go up as much as I wanted them to.
Well, because they haven't fully recovered yet.
Yeah, not even close.
Isn't it crazy that during our time of highest unemployment, and unemployment is not reported accurately in America, at least not since the 70s, but if you look at real unemployment, we have the most unemployment that we've had basically since the Great Depression, where people, I mean, more than half of were wiped out in the first year of the pandemic, or the first quarter. I don't even remember. It was a lot of wealth that got dragged out very rapidly, and reshuffled upwards. And when people were suffering the most in the highest level of unemployment, and people were barely able to afford, medication, all this stuff, we were hitting all-time highs every single day for like months consecutively of our stock market, of which most people had pulled their money out. Somehow stocks were still just fucking rolling.
Well,
isn't that some?
Yeah. I don't think it was completely unsustainable until like a lot of people started spending their stimulus money on it.
Yeah, well, look, you didn't think it was unsustainable until what, a year ago? That's a crazy statement. I've never heard anyone say that.
Maybe like a trend of like.
Wait, you think
Like
The
a
economy is
like
unsustainable. What's unsustainable?
maybe on like a year-to-year basis, like over the course of the next year, it would have been stable.
What are we talking about? What's unsustainable?
Well, just the
The
shit, dude.
stocks, the
Yeah,
existence
like
of the stock market. I
any
personally think that that's been a failed project for many
any
decades.
single index except for crypto is going through a hockey stick right now, and like you already know that. I'm just saying that's what it refers to, like all markets.
Well,
It's funny that you
all
refer to
markets
crypto as
always
an
go through
index.
a hockey stick.
Well, it's everything follows Bitcoin, and you kind of have to view crypto as separate from the rest of the stock market if you want to make sense of it.
Well, it's not a stock nor a commodity. It's not a part of the stock market, so it's
It's taxed
funny to me when people.
It's taxed exactly like a stock. That's why I think of it as one.
Well, all
Yeah,
assets are
I believe
taxed like
legally
a
it's
stock.
classified as a hybrid asset, but
No,
yeah,
it's as far as I know, it's classified as a capital asset, like a stock. I don't know.
yeah,
That's how I
hybrid
pay my
assets are
that's how I pay my
capital.
taxes. So, but like that's not surprising. So is any if like any asset you have will be taxed that way. It's not like this special
That's not true.
like if you have
Art
an asset, it goes
does
up
not
in
follow
value.
that.
I
Say
can't
again?
believe I won't.
Not all assets behave that way. If you own art, for example,
Yeah, but
in many
art is a
states,
collectible. It's very special, and it's a very special category, collectibles.
kind of. Fine art has nothing to do with collectability in the states of California, Illinois, or New York, which happen to also be home of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New
I
York,
mean, like, there's no
which
point in
are the art
discussing the
centers
minutia
of
of
the
art.
world. And fine art, specifically paintings, are completely untaxed for the sake of wealth trading. So if you wanted to, let's say, purchase a company from a corporation, you wanted to buy it
But
out.
this is not relevant to the subject of crypto being taxable and comparable to the market.
It is
right?
relevant to your statement being wrong that all assets are taxed the same.
Yeah, good call.
I didn't say all. I said most. I think. Pretty sure. Like,
You did say all, but that's fine if you meant
it
most.
doesn't matter. You're picking an exception that proves the rule.
It's not the only exception. As you pointed out, there are other things called collectibles, which are taxed
Okay, but
differently.
what's the point of discussing the exceptions when almost everything else is not?
Okay, well, let's say we get a list of 100 exceptions. I mean, does that mean that they're no longer just exceptions?
aren't
Do you
100
need 101 exceptions in order for it
Discussion
to...
is not helping me sort my collectibles at all with this
This is
discussion.
not 100. There aren't 100 exceptions. Assets you own.
If I
they
buy
go up in price-
CryptoKitties, does that count as a collectible asset in which it would be tax exempt, or
Okay.
is that a utility token that
I
has to
couldn't
be
hear you.
taxed the same as Ethereum would be since it's on the Ethereum network? I mean, these are all relevant questions that our accountants would love to be involved with.
I mean, very true, but that has nothing to do with the statement, right? Like, if something is a collectible or not is an excellent question, but it has nothing to do with how we got into this conversation.
It has
If I collect women,
nothing to do with
let's say I collected like toys,
dive on 9/11.
I mean, you can go
and
to the IRS about women.
and these
right.
toys that I collect, I spend so much money on them for breast implants and food, and oh my god, my grandma's in the hospital, and so I pay for the chemotherapy. Are these all business expenses? Do I get to write this off?
If you also claim income from them, perhaps.
Well, as their pimp, I would be claiming income from them.
Generally, though, and this is America for you, anything health related is the hardest to get written off on your taxes. Shows you.
But maybe the health of your employees, though, might be different.
Well, yeah, that's different. Yeah.
So he's saying he's gonna run a whorehouse, and so it's possible that.
Sir, this is a gentleman's club. This is not a whorehouse. We're
Sorry.
a few leagues fancier.
You'll see no one here but gentlemen.
Point is, you might be able to write them off. I'm sure the pimps know all the tax ins and outs. I don't.
I wouldn't really call myself a pimp. I'm a respected employer
Very well.
of underprivileged and underserved minority class in this country.
Intersectional.
Absolutely. I'm doing
You're
the
a
Lord's work.
you're a pretty important master penny pincher. That makes you a pimp.
With 2 P's.
Yeah, or 3 if you want. Dude, it's like upgrade from Idiocracy. Okay, cool. A lot of people left.
I blame that on you. I said nothing to make anyone leave. It was all this nonsense about AI upscaling. You guys completely ruined it. I'm talking about the real issues. How many socks make a pile? You know, how many exceptions do you need in the list before they're not just an exception that proves the rule, but that rule just isn't
If you
a
ever
rule?
need anybody to kick everybody out of the room by talking about AI upscaling, I'm your person.
I mean, his name is Reels, but is he really real, or is he an AI whose voice is synthesized through, GPT-3?
Just every New Yorker
Already-
ever, like all their voices are dumped into one data set and they're combined.
I have access to GPT-4. Okay, yeah, there actually is a user on this Discord who I wonder if she is GPT-4.
Me, and I think Loac too had a beta access. We got whatever the fucking thing was.
Yeah,
I've toyed with it a little bit.
their whole fucking system is fraught because you can't do a big enough fucking query without paying for it. So you couldn't actually do anything.
Ooh. Wait, they
Well, you
haven't
got I
distributed?
think like 100 words per, which is plenty for small things.
For small,
They
but
haven't.
I was trying to get it
What
to write
version?
script.
What version is this? What is this?
It was GTP
For GPT-3
Oh,
when
3.
it was first released.
Oh, I see. Wow. Wait, this is OpenAI is charging money, or is this like a third
Yeah.
party?
So you would get the beta access, and it would give you 10,000 bits.
Yeah, it would
And
give you like
tried to
credits
get it-
basically.
Yeah, 1 credit accounted for like 4 words approximately, or something like that.
I see.
And
Yeah,
then
and
once
so
you
you
used all
could,
those up, you had to
yeah.
pay.
Well, I guess it's a good way to stop spam.
That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make it a spam bot.
Are you really?
Yeah. I was
Hilarious.
trying to get it to read like 1920s fucking.
Really believable Nigerian prince whose father passed away
On 9/11.
I was
on 9/11.
close. I just couldn't get it to.
He was in the tower. I mean, he was a real Nigerian king. He was in the financial world. You know, this guy had money. And he was at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Funny enough, there was through my ArtStation account, I got contacted by a Nigerian lawyer that said there's assets for me.
Ooh.
Is that real? I didn't even realize that ArtStation had problems with spam like that.
Yeah, that's why it was weird. I was like, why?
That's crazy. I've been waiting for business offers on ArtStation for so long, and they go to you first? What the fuck?
I actually have some professional illustrators and graphic designers that follow my shit. I don't know why. I almost never post.
Nice, dude.
Look at you, you're just so fucking cool, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's pretty neat.
That's great. What does that have to do with 9/11 again?
It's an absolute tragedy, just like your artwork.
I'm doing the word association in my head, and I can't think of any string of words that have been used to to turn this back around on you. All right. Well, what did we learn here today? 9/11 was an outside job. It was an outside job. Economy. It's the perfect crime. Bin Laden is totally justified. There was no resistance on that. Not a single person said.
I mean, I laughed.
Nobody even sighed. Nobody even sighed when I said that.
They just kind of looked down sternly, knowing the truth.
As we all know, silence is consent. So you've all offered me approval for these statements.
Loud and intense approval.
Look, if what I was saying, trying to defend some of the conspiracy theories, I don't believe that conspiracy, just to, again, reiterate that. But what I was saying in defense of them,
Well, then you must not believe
connecting the CIA to Building 7 and, it was blown up on purpose and all this, if that seemed far-fetched, that connection, I don't know. I think, like, what Joe said earlier about the connection between 9/11 and the IDW, like, there's a trail, but it's not a direct one. So I feel like what I said is only as far-fetched as what he said, and what he said wasn't that far-fetched, which means what I said wasn't that far-fetched. If A equals B and B equals C. Yeah, no, I did that right. So Bin Laden did nothing wrong. Hashtag.
I love how he summarized that. It's to go back to what Joe was saying earlier. Bin Laden did nothing wrong.
Yes, if we had to combine the discussion, everything talked about, and the ideologies of both America's response to the attack and the ideology behind the attack, if we had to summarize it as a single term, I believe we could summarize it as the Prophet Muhammad, but prophet spelled with an F instead of a PH.
Whoa, deep.
Hashtag I'm 14 and this is deep.
Yes. Well, we could throw it into some sort of algorithm that would just shorten it for us without us having to do any work. Like it would automatically pick
Jesus.
the beginning and the end, the first 5 seconds and the last 5 seconds of the audio sample. So you'd go, 1,000. Going back to what Joe was saying, 1,000. Bin Laden did nothing wrong. Then if there's extra at the end, it just goes.
So this weird. I'm gonna go a little off topic again.
I love how he's not even protesting this.
Speaking of protests that happened in New York, whatever happened to fucking Occupy? Like that was a real movement, and they got silenced? They just petered out? Like what? I literally don't even know what happened.
Winter happened.
Is that really what? Like I don't know. I'm asking honestly. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, that's when they petered out. Is winter. It's really hard to protest in 0-degree weather in New York. That's what happened.
So that's what happened. That's why they dispersed.
Yep.
That's so fucking nutty. They had like power. They were strong for a while.
A lot of the well-televised police clashes between them and the police would have been like in October or a little bit before in September, maybe the summer when it first started, maybe earlier. But you don't really see them a lot after the late fall of 2011. You don't see a lot coming out of that movement. And by that summer, they had already just been cleared out. They didn't come back a lot when it got warm again in the summer of 2012. I was actually at the one in Boston for a while, Occupy Boston in Dewey Square, which is right where the financial district meets the shore.
So we now have docs on Aquatic.
Well, they hurt the banks so much. Their activism was so effective and it hurt the banks so much that they're still trying to track down all the people who participated in it. Dude, I was honestly going to answer your question by saying if the Occupy Wall Street people had figured out how to do a short squeeze, if they knew anything about our systems, like they could have actually hurt Wall Street in a meaningful way.
Well,
And
so I think
people would have actually noticed their movement. Imagine if they'd figured that out, huh?
Well, no, people did notice the movement. They had all kinds of legitimate media coverage, and they definitely had the backing of the public. Like, it was very clear what the problem was and what they were upset about and who was responsible. I
Yeah,
think
and the news
point
kept
of their
being like,
movement.
they don't really know what they're protesting. You heard that?
I didn't get that vibe from it at all. But to me, it seems very clear. At least the organizers seem to have a very clear message and a clear understanding of what their goals were. But it was just it completely failed. The goals were not achieved, and not for lack of organization.
The news didn't really report their goals at all, and the news didn't really take them seriously.
Okay, so I'm back now.
Oh, whoa.
Oh, hi.
What did I miss out on? What did we cover? That
we were told that you were listening through the.
They told me some naughty things you said.
Yeah, I could hear through the IDW community thing, but I was in a phone call with someone else, so I didn't actually pay attention to most of it.
We got him, boys.
That is a relevant 9/11 meme. Good job.
Job. Yeah, dude. I don't know. You didn't miss much.
Okay. Well, I've been recording the conversation now for close to for 2.5 hours. So, did you guys still have stuff you want to talk about, or do you mind if I end the recording?
So to be fair, I did sort of, not everything I said was super serious, but at the very beginning when I was going through the notes I wrote down, I was serious about all of that, and I do want to pose the very last note to you, because I think that the real takeaway from this has nothing to do with any particular ideology behind the attack, but rather with the response to it. That the real takeaway should be about the expansion of the surveillance state under both Bush and Obama.
Mm-hmm.
That to me seems like the real issue that's come out of this. I mean, we could talk about the fact that we've been in war with these countries that were not themselves responsible for the attack, but that's sort of a tired topic, and everybody's very well aware of that, whereas people aren't nearly as well aware of how massively our surveillance apparatus has grown under the guise of fighting terrorism.
I think most people do know about that, so that's good, I guess.
They know about it, but they don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's more of a violation of human rights for what they've done with their surveillance apparatus than it has been a violation of human rights for us invading these other countries. Like, so when I say how severe it is, like the scope of it, I think people don't realize how massive it is.
I saw a meme a few weeks ago. It was like people in the 60s and 70s, like after Watergate, like, be careful, the government could be wiretapping your phone. Like, people in 2021, hey, wiretap, what's the latest movie?
Yeah, I've seen. There was a series of memes like that. I saw one that was kind of like that, where they were talking to Siri. They said, "Hey, wiretap, how do I make spaghetti?" Although that's, however, like your phone and your your home assistant device, these are private companies that are fundamentally or systematically raping your rights to privacy, but they're still private companies doing that. Whereas what I'm concerned with is our government doing it in a very private, they're not transparent about it at all. And the scope of what they're doing is far more massive than what individual companies like Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, like what they're doing. Granted,
they
they've gotten
get data from all those guys. That's where they get a lot of their data from.
Yeah, no, they also get it from all of them. All of those companies have also complied. Like in telecommunications relay stations, the NSA gets their own private room. AT&T is just completely bent over for our government in that sense.
Definitionally, the government surveillance program is bigger because they can help themselves to any of the data that's collected by private companies, and they have their own, which they don't sell because
Exactly.
because it's theirs.
But however, I would also add just again because I don't think I'm conveying it well. The apparatus that the NSA had, just the NSA, let alone the rest of the intelligence agencies, the apparatus that the NSA has for themselves, that they've developed internally, is still more massive than any particular private company, even bigger than Google. And so I think that this is a really crucial thing to realize here. Edward Snowden talks about how some of that has happened in effect of what you were saying, Aquatic, where I believe his quote is verbatim. The greatest rebranding campaign that's ever existed, second only to the Department of War rebranding itself to the Department of Defense, is when surveillance companies rebranded themselves as social media. And so that definitely is a huge factor where they can just take whatever they want from these private companies that are all American. Right, Facebook and I think Microsoft or one of the other infaming are headquartered in like Ireland, and Ireland has its own form of like Silicon Valley, but these are all still Americans running these companies, and all of these companies are still beholden to the American government ultimately. So that is a huge component to it. But the NSA on its own, as an individual organization, still has more power with regards to surveillance than any individual private corporation. So there's still like the absolute crushing scope of this is insane.
All right. Well, that's an interesting note to leave off. All right. Thanks for showing up, guys. It'll be
Oh, you
interesting
guys
for
don't
me
want to? Okay, all right. Well,
You
eventually,
brought
I have to.
everybody
We're done,
down,
just like
man.
that.
Eventually, I have to bring the recording to an end. But you know what? I would say
I hate sad endings.
Cyborg's doing his podcast thing, and he's always looking for community input. So, like, reach out to him if this is a topic you think is worth discussing further in this community. All right. Well, I'm going to end it there. Thanks for showing up, guys.